The gunshots echoed through Crow's Ridge like thunder, three sharp cracks that scattered the desert ravens into the cloudless Arizona sky. Mason Reynolds crouched behind a sun-bleached boulder, the acrid smell of gunpowder mixing with the dusty heat of 1882 frontier air. Blood trickled from a shallow cut on his weathered cheek where a bullet had kissed the stone beside him, sending splinters of rock into his face. Three men lay dead in the gulch below, their bodies sprawled awkwardly in the red dust, six shooters still warm in lifeless hands. Mason's Colt single-action army hung heavy at his side, three spent casings cooling in its chamber. His breathing remained steady, controlled, the breathing of a man who'd seen death too many times to be rattled by its familiar face. "Should have known better than to ambush a Gettysburg scout," he muttered, reloading his revolver with practiced precision, thumb pressing each .45 caliber round home with mechanical efficiency. At 45, Mason Reynolds wore his years like notches on a gun belt. The desert sun had tanned his face to leather, deepening the crow's feet around eyes that had witnessed the bloodiest day in American history. A jagged scar ran from his right temple to the corner of his mouth, a rebel bayonet's farewell gift at Cold Harbor. His dark hair and beard were salted with gray, but his hands remained rock steady and his eyes sharp as a hawk's. Mason collected the bounty notices from the dead men's pockets, wanted for stage robbery and murder near Tucson, and mounted his dun gelding. Deadwater was 15 miles east, where Sheriff Holloway would pay $300 for these men, dead or alive. Money enough to last through winter, if he was careful. The trail to Deadwater wound through Apache territory, but Mason knew these lands better than most white men. Years as an Army scout had taught him to read the desert like a book, where water hid beneath dry creek beds, which game trails belonged to men rather than animals, and most importantly, how to stay invisible when necessary. 4 miles from town, Mason's instincts prickled. Fresh hoof prints cut across the trail, 5 riders moving fast, their horses driven hard. Curious, he dismounted, studying the sign. These weren't Apache tracks. The horseshoes were Army issue. One horse dragged its right hoof slightly, a distinctive mark he recognized. Cooper, he whispered, the name bitter on his tongue. Frank Hangman Cooper had served under Mason in the 5th of New York during Gettysburg, before deserting with the regiment's payroll. Last Mason heard, Cooper had a $500 bounty on his head for murder and robbery along the border territories. The tracks veered northwest toward Rattlesnake Canyon. Mason hesitated, bounties in his saddlebag calling him toward Deadwater. But something about those tracks, their urgency, their purpose, gnawed at him. Cooper wasn't one to rush unless he was chasing something valuable. He clicked to his gelding, turning northwest. The sound reached him first, distant gunfire, then shouts carrying on the hot desert air. Mason urged his horse up a rocky incline, dismounting at the ridge to approach on foot. Lying flat against sun-heated stone, he pulled his Army-issue field glass from his saddlebag and surveyed the scene below. 5 riders had cornered a lone figure against the Red Canyon wall. Even from this distance, Mason recognized Cooper's massive frame atop a stolen cavalry mount. The man's black duster flapped like crow wings as he gestured with a rifle, shouting orders to his men who were closing in on their quarry. Their target was a woman, Apache by her dress and the distinctive way she'd braided her hair with bone beads. She stood defiant, a hunting knife in one hand, backed against the canyon with nowhere to run. Blood stained her buckskin dress at the shoulder, but she held herself with fierce dignity, knife pointed at the nearest rider. "Give us the map, squaw!" Cooper's voice boomed against the canyon walls. "You're gonna die anyway. Might as well die quick." Mason's jaw tightened. Whatever Cooper wanted, it wasn't justice. 5 armed men against 1 wounded woman wasn't a fair fight by any measure, and Mason Reynolds had seen enough unfair fights during the war to last 10 lifetimes. Sliding his Winchester from its scabbard, Mason took careful aim at the rider nearest the woman. The distance was considerable, over 400 yards, but the air was still, and his rifle was true. Exhaling slowly, he squeezed the trigger. The rider tumbled from his saddle like a rag doll. Before the others could react, Mason worked the lever action and fired again. A second man dropped, clutching his chest. The remaining men scattered for cover, Cooper bellowing curses as he scanned the ridgeline for the hidden shooter. Mason didn't wait. Sliding back from the ridge, he mounted and spurred his gelding down a game trail he knew would intersect the canyon floor. Cooper and his remaining men would regroup quickly, and the woman wouldn't stand a chance if they found her first. His horse's hooves thundered against packed earth as he raced into the canyon, Winchester ready. He spotted the woman darting between boulders, Cooper's men in pursuit. Spurring forward, Mason rode directly between them, firing twice more from horseback. One shot went wide, but the other found its mark in a rider's shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. "Get on!" Mason shouted to the woman, extending his arm as he brought the gelding alongside her. For a moment their eyes locked, hers obsidian dark, fierce with pride and suspicion. Then gunfire erupted from behind them. A bullet whined past Mason's ear. Another struck the woman's leg, causing her to stumble. Without hesitation, Mason leaned from the saddle and swept her up, feeling the breath leave his lungs as a bullet struck his shoulder. White-hot pain lanced through him, but he kept the horse moving, the woman's grip tight around his waist. Cooper's voice rang out behind them, words that made Mason's blood run cold. "I know you, Reynolds. I'll find you. Your scalp's worth more to me than any bounty." Mason rode hard for 3 miles before the pain in his shoulder forced him to slow. Blood soaked his shirt, the bullet lodged somewhere beneath his collarbone. The woman behind him remained silent, though her grip had not loosened. "My cabin's 2 miles east," he managed through gritted teeth. "Can you ride if I pass out?" "Yes," came the reply, a single word spoken in accented English. Voice low and melodic despite its curtness. His vision swam as they approached the small cabin nestled against granite cliffs. Mason had built it 3 years ago, after leaving the army, a fortress disguised as a homestead, with rifle ports disguised as decorative knotholes and clear lines of sight in all directions. He dismounted awkwardly, legs nearly buckling beneath him. The woman slid down more gracefully despite her wounded leg, watching him with wary eyes as he stumbled toward the cabin door. "Cooper won't stop looking," Mason warned, fumbling with the iron key. "He's a mad dog with a grudge." Inside, he collapsed onto a wooden chair, the room spinning around him. The woman moved cautiously through the cabin, taking stock of the single room with its stone fireplace, narrow cot, and shelves stocked with provisions. A gun rack held 3 rifles and a shotgun. Dried herbs hung from the rafters alongside jerky and corn. Mason's field surgeon kit lay on a shelf near the hearth. Without asking permission, she retrieved it, then approached him with determined steps. "Shirt off," she commanded, unrolling the canvas pack of surgical instruments. Mason complied, wincing as dried blood stuck fabric to wound. The woman examined the bullet hole with clinical detachment, then selected a slender probe from the kit. "Drink," she ordered, pushing a bottle of whiskey into his hand. He took a long pull, then another, warmth spreading through his chest as she sterilized the probe in the hearth flame. Without warning, she dug the instrument into his wound. Mason bit down hard on a leather strap she'd placed between his teeth, sweat beading on his forehead as she extracted the bullet with brutal efficiency. "Army bullet," she observed, dropping the misshapen lead onto the table. "Not your first." Mason's torso bore the constellation of old wounds. The star-shaped scar from a Confederate minie-ball at Antietam, the long slash from a cavalry saber at Yellow Tavern, and half a dozen others, each with its own story of survival against odds. She cleaned and bandaged the fresh wound, her touch practiced and sure. Only when she finished did she tend to her own leg, a bullet graze that had torn flesh but not broken bone. "You have a name?" Mason asked, voice rough from whiskey and pain. "Liwanu," she replied, not looking up from her work. "That means something?" "Thunder Woman." Mason nodded. "Appropriate." "Why Cooper hunt you?" he asked, watching her hands. Strong hands, calloused from hard work, but graceful in their movements. Liwanu's eyes met his, measuring, calculating. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, for she reached into a hidden pocket in her dress and withdrew a folded piece of tanned deer hide. Carefully, she spread it on the table between them. It was a map marked with natural formations and symbols Mason recognized as Apache. One location was circled with ochre paint. "Gold," she said simply. "Sacred ground. White men must not find." Mason studied the map, recognizing Crow's Ridge and the patterns of canyons that surrounded them. The marked location lay deep in Apache territory, in mountains considered cursed by most white settlers. "How'd Cooper know about this?" Liwanu's face hardened. "My husband found gold. Told white trader before dying. Trader told Cooper." She reclaimed the map, folding it carefully. "Cooper killed trader. Now wants all gold, all Apache land." Mason didn't ask how her husband died. Some questions were better left unasked in these territories, where violence was as common as dust storms and just as indiscriminate. "You're safe here tonight," he said, rising unsteadily. "But Cooper won't give up. Man's like a wolf with the scent of blood." "I know wolf," Liwanu replied, her hand moving to a bone-handled knife at her belt. "Wolf can die like any creature." Night fell across the desert, bringing relative cool and absolute darkness. Mason checked and rechecked his weapons by lamplight, painfully aware of every sound outside the cabin. Liwanu moved about silently, examining his bookshelves with obvious curiosity, fingers tracing the spines of volumes few would expect to find in a frontier cabin. Thoreau, Whitman, military histories, and maps bound in leather. "You read many books for bounty hunter," she observed. Mason loaded his shotgun, placing it beside the door. "Wasn't always hunting men. Taught school in New York before the war." The revelation hung in the air between them, an unexpected glimpse of another life, another man who'd existed before blood and gunpowder had reshaped him. A twig snapped outside. Both froze, hands moving to weapons. Mason extinguished the lamp with a quick breath, plunging the cabin into darkness. In the black silence, he moved to a rifle port, Liwanu to another. Both peered into the moonlit clearing. A deer moved cautiously across the open ground, stopping to nibble at sparse grass before disappearing into the junipers. Mason relaxed slightly but remained vigilant. Cooper wouldn't attack tonight, not without knowing the terrain or Mason's defenses, but tomorrow would be different. "Sleep," he told Liwanu, gesturing to the cot. "I'll keep watch." She shook her head. "We both watch, half night each." Mason didn't argue. Strength would be needed tomorrow, and Liwanu had proven herself capable. They established a rotation, and Mason took first watch, his back against the wall beside the window, rifle across his knees. Hours passed in silence. The moon tracked across the star-filled sky, casting silver light through the window. Mason's thoughts drifted to Cooper, the man he'd once considered a brother in arms, before witnessing his true nature at Gettysburg. Cooper had always been violent, but the war had twisted something in him, turning violence to sadism. After Cooper deserted with the payroll, Mason had tracked him for months before losing his trail in Kansas. Now fate had thrown them together again, with an Apache woman and her secret goal between them. Near midnight, Liwanu joined him by the window, wordlessly taking the rifle he offered. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, a momentary contact that somehow acknowledged their unlikely alliance. "Sleep," she commanded softly. "Dawn comes quickly." As Mason stretched out on the cot, Luana spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. My son, Chitan. Cooper has him. The words fell like stones in still water. Map for son, Cooper says. But Cooper is Snake, speaks with forked tongue. Mason raised himself on one elbow, suddenly alert despite his exhaustion. Your son? How old? 10 winters. Brave like his father. Fierce like his mother. Pride and pain mingled in her voice. Cooper took him 1 moon ago from hunting party. Keeps him in cage. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Her silhouette remained motionless against the window. Needed to know if you were a man who could be trusted, man who would help for right reasons. Mason absorbed this revelation in silence. The stakes had just risen considerably. Not just a map or gold or even territory, but a child's life. We'll find him, he promised, the words simple but weighted with purpose. Together. Dawn broke with violence. Gunfire shattered the morning stillness, bullets splintering the cabin shutters. Mason rolled from the cot, drawing his Colt as he hit the floor. Luana was already crouched beneath the window, Winchester ready. 8 men, she reported tersely. Positions in trees. Rocks. Cooper's voice boomed across the clearing. Reynolds, send out the squaw on the map, and maybe I'll let you live. Mason moved to a rifle port, quickly assessing their situation. Cooper had positioned his men around the cabin's perimeter, cutting off escape routes. 2 riders circled the rear, preventing flight toward the cliffs. They think us trapped, Liwanu observed, a hint of grim amusement in her voice. Mason nodded. Cooper always did underestimate his enemies. Few knew about the narrow tunnel Mason had painstakingly carved through the cliff behind the cabin, an escape route inspired by too many close calls during his bounty hunting days. It emerged in a hidden gully 300 yards east, where he kept emergency supplies and a second horse. We need time, he whispered to Liwanu. Understanding flashed in her eyes. Without hesitation, she fired through the rifle port, her shot dropping one of Cooper's men. Mason fired simultaneously from another port, creating the impression of multiple defenders. Cooper's men returned fire, peppering the cabin with bullets that thudded into logs or whined off stone. Mason and Liwanu worked methodically, firing from different positions, making every shot count. 3 more of Cooper's men fell wounded or dead before the attackers retreated to safer positions. They'll regroup, Mason warned, checking their ammunition. Probably try to burn us out next. As if on cue, a flaming arrow arced toward the cabin roof. It lodged in the pine shakes, flames licking at the dry wood. More followed, a dozen fiery messengers of death. Time to leave, Mason decided, grabbing a saddlebag filled with ammunition and provisions. He led Liwanu to the back room where a bearskin rug concealed a trap door. Beneath lay a narrow tunnel, barely wide enough for a man's shoulders, reinforced with timber supports. Go, he urged, handing her a bullseye lantern. Follow it straight through. Wait for me at the end. Liwanu hesitated, eyes darting between Mason and the tunnel. You follow? Right behind you. Need to slow them down first. She nodded once, then disappeared into the earth like a spirit returning to the underworld. Mason closed the trap door, replaced the rug, and moved quickly through the cabin, gathering what couldn't be abandoned. His father's pocket watch, a pouch of gold dust, an old daguerreotype of his family. Smoke filled the cabin as the roof began to burn in earnest. Mason retreated to the tunnel, pausing only to pull a hidden lever that would collapse the back room's floor once he was safely away. His final surprise for Cooper. The tunnel was cool and dark, smelling of earth and limestone. Mason crawled on hands and knees, his wounded shoulder protesting each movement. Ahead, Liwanu's lantern bobbed like a distant star, guiding him forward. They emerged into the hidden gully as flames fully engulfed the cabin. Distantly, they heard Cooper's shouts turn from triumph to rage as the back room collapsed, leaving no trace of their escape route. Liwanu's eyes reflected the golden light of dawn. "You're home," she said softly, watching the distant flames. "I am sorry," Mason shrugged, the gesture belying the tightness in his chest. "Just logs and stone. Home is here," he tapped his temple, "and here, his heart. Can't burn that away." A spare horse waited as promised, a sturdy paint mare Mason had traded for last winter. They mounted quickly, Mason on his gelding, Liwanu on the mare, and rode east into rising sun, leaving Cooper's curses far behind. By midday, they reached a plateau overlooking the vast expanse of Apache territory. Mason drew rein, studying the land with his field glass. No pursuit yet, but Cooper wouldn't give up easily, not with gold and revenge driving him. "There!" Liwanu pointed toward a distant plume of dust moving south. "My brother Kestal, he watches Cooper's camp where they keep Chitan." Mason focused the glass, spotting the lone rider moving with the fluid grace unique to Apache horsemen. "You plan this? Having your people track Cooper?" Liwanu nodded. "After Cooper took Chitan, I sought help from my tribe. But elders feared war with white soldiers if we attack Cooper's camp." Her face hardened. "I would not wait while my son suffers. So I came alone to find Cooper, draw him away from camp." "And I was a useful surprise," Mason observed, not unkindly. "Yes." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. The hunter becomes unexpected ally. They made camp that night in the shelter of a sandstone overhang, building only the smallest fire. While Liwanu prepared a simple meal of jerky and corn cakes, Mason cleaned his weapons with the methodical care of a man who had learned the hard way that such attention could mean the difference between life and death. "Tell me about your son," he said, breaking the companionable silence. Something softened in Liwanu's expression. "Chitan means hawk in our tongue. He has his father's eyes, sees everything." She paused, staring into the flames. "Learns fast, already knows horse better than men 3 times his age. Speaks some English from trading post. Asks many questions." "Sounds like a boy with spirit," Mason said. "Too much spirit," Liwanu replied, but pride shone through her concern. "When Cooper took him, Chitan fought, bit Cooper's hand to bone." A fierce smile briefly transformed her face. "Cooper will carry Chitan's mark forever." Mason chuckled. "Like mother, like son." He worked oil into his rifle's action. "Cooper's keeping him alive because he thinks you'll trade the map. But Cooper's no fool. Once he has what he wants..." He left the thought unfinished. They both knew the likely outcome. "Cooper has camp in Diablo Canyon," Liwanu said. 20 men, maybe more. Some soldiers who left army. They have big gun that fires many bullets." "Gatling gun," Mason muttered. The situation grew more complicated by the moment. "Your brother, how many warriors with him?" 20. "Good fighters, but not against such weapons." Mason nodded thoughtfully. "We need a plan better than rushing in with guns blazing." They talked long into the night, combining Mason's military tactics with Liwanu's knowledge of the land and her people's ways of war. By the time they settled to sleep, a strategy had begun to take shape. Dangerous, but with a chance of success. As the fire burned down to embers, Liwanu spread her blanket near Mason's, not touching, but close enough that he could hear her breathing in the desert stillness. "Why help us?" she asked suddenly. "Not your fight." Mason stared up at stars so bright and numerous they seemed to press down upon the earth. "Been asking myself the same question." He paused, searching for words. "Spent too many years watching good people suffer because men like Cooper wanted something that wasn't theirs to take. Did nothing then. Doing something now." Liwanu considered this. "Simple justice? Simple, yes, but justice. Don't know if there's enough justice left in this world to balance all that's been taken." "Then we make our own justice," she said, her voice carrying the quiet certainty of stone and sky. Mason turned to look at her profile in the fading firelight. Guess we do at that. They rode at first light, pushing hard through narrow canyons and across sun-baked mesas. By mid-afternoon, they reached the meeting point Liwanu had arranged with her brother. Kesta awaited them in the shadow of a massive butte shaped like a sleeping warrior. The Apache warrior was tall and lean, his face severe beneath a headband that held back shoulder-length black hair. He wore a mix of traditional dress and items clearly taken from cavalry supplies, a testament to the complex reality of survival in contested territories. Kestal and Liwanu spoke rapidly in Apache, hands moving in emphasis. Mason caught enough words to follow the conversation's drift. Cooper had reinforced his position, bringing in more men and supplies. The situation at Diablo Canyon had grown more precarious. Finally, Kestal turned to Mason, studying him with the intensity of a man measuring an unknown quantity. "You fought many battles," he said in careful English. "Against my people too, yes?" Mason met his gaze squarely. "Yes, as scout, not soldier. Still wrong." Kestal nodded, accepting the frank admission. "Cooper brings more blue coats tomorrow. Real soldiers this time. Says Apache steal from miners, kill settlers." His lip curled in disgust. "Lies to bring army." "Captain know about boy?" Mason asked. "No. Cooper hides Chitan when officers come." Mason absorbed this information, tactical possibilities forming and reforming in his mind. "Can your warriors get us close to where they keep Chitan?" "Yes, I show you." Kestas squatted, drawing a rough map in the dust with his knife tip. "Camp here. Chitan kept in wooden cage here, near Big Gun. 2 guards always." "And the army comes from the south?" "Yes, by midday tomorrow." Mason studied the crude map, then looked at Liwanu and Kestal. "We need higher ground, defensible position, somewhere we can hold against superior numbers." Kestal's expression showed grim approval. "Spirit Mountain, Apache strong place, 2 trails only, easily defended." He pointed to a towering mesa rising from the desert floor about 5 miles from Cooper's camp. "Perfect." Mason outlined his plan, making adjustments based on Kestal's knowledge of the terrain and Cooper's defenses. It was risky, depending on precise timing and more than a little luck, but it offered their best chance of rescuing Chitan and exposing Cooper's scheme. As night fell, they joined Kestal's warriors at their hidden camp. 20 Apache men welcomed Liwanu with quiet respect, eyeing Mason with guarded curiosity. Most had never seen a white man who wasn't trying to kill or displace them. Among the gathered warriors, Mason spotted a young Apache no more than 16, his eyes burning with a familiar intensity. The boy approached Liwanu, speaking rapidly and gesturing toward Diablo Canyon. "This is Nokosi," Liwanu explained to Mason. "He watched Cooper's camp yesterday, saw Chitan." Mason knelt to the young warrior's level. "How is the boy?" Nokosi hesitated, looking to Liwanu for permission to speak. At her nod, he replied in halting English. "Boy is strong, not cry, not beg, but thin, hungry. They hurt him." Nokosi's expression darkened. "Cooper hits sometimes. When boy not answer questions about map." Mason felt cold fury rising within him, the same controlled rage that had carried him through the worst battles of the war. He placed a hand on Nokosi's shoulder. "Tomorrow Chitan comes home. You help us?" The young warrior straightened, pride evident in his bearing. "I help. I am good with bow." Silent. "Good, we'll need that." They spent the night preparing, checking weapons, distributing ammunition, planning signals and fallback positions. Mason showed the Apache warriors how to fortify their positions on Spirit Mountain against cavalry tactics, while Liwanu and Kestal organized the rescue party that would slip into Cooper's camp during the confusion of the initial assault. Before dawn, Mason stood alone at the edge of camp, watching the eastern sky lighten from black to deepest blue. Lawanu joined him silently, her presence a tangible warmth in the pre-dawn chill. "If I don't make it," Mason said without preamble, "take Chitan north to the Lakota. I have friends there. Tell them Reynolds sent you." Liwanu studied his profile. "You will not die today. Everyone dies sometime. Just want to make it count when I do." Her hand found his, fingers intertwining with a naturalness that belied their short acquaintance. "Today is not your day, Mason Reynolds. Spirits have more for you to do." He turned to face her, struck by the quiet certainty in her voice. In that moment, with the new day's light painting her copper skin with gold, Mason realized how quickly this woman had come to matter to him. Not as a cause or a mission, but as a person whose strength and determination matched his own. They reached Spirit Mountain by mid-morning. The Apache warriors took positions along the rim, establishing clear fields of fire covering both access trails. Mason joined Kista at the western edge, studying the desert floor through his field glass as the sun climbed higher. In Diablo Canyon below, Cooper's camp buzzed with activity, men moving supplies, checking weapons, preparing for the army column expected from the south. In the center of camp stood a crude wooden cage, and within it, a small figure sat motionless in the growing heat. "Chetan," Lawana whispered, her voice tight with controlled emotion as she looked through Mason's field glass. Mason focused on the boy. Despite his ordeal, Chetan sat straight-backed and defiant, watching his captors with calculating eyes that reminded Mason powerfully of Lawanu. The child's buckskin shirt was torn and dirty, his face smudged with dust and what might have been dried blood, but his posture revealed an unbroken spirit. As they watched, a large man approach the cage. Cooper himself, easily identifiable by his black duster in imposing size. He spoke to the boy, gesturing angrily. Chetan's response was to turn his back on Cooper, a gesture of contempt that earned him a rattle of the cage, but nothing worse. Cooper evidently still needed the boy alive and relatively unharmed. "Your son has courage," Mason observed. "He knows I come for him," Liwanu replied simply. By noon, dust clouds appeared on the southern horizon, riders approaching in formation. Mason counted 30 men, a cavalry detachment led by an officer whose insignia marked him as a captain. They rode directly for Cooper's camp, where they were greeted with apparent welcome. "Now we wait," Mason said, lowering his glass. "Let Cooper play his hand." They didn't wait long. Within an hour, the cavalry column reformed, now accompanied by Cooper and a dozen of his men. They rode north toward Spirit Mountain. Just as Mason had predicted, Cooper would want to eliminate any Apache presence before bringing in mining equipment and men to extract the gold. "They come," Kestaw announced unnecessarily as the column began the ascent of the Eastern Trail. Mason nodded. "Remember, we need the captain to understand he's been misled. No shooting unless they fire first." The Apache warriors took their positions, arrows nocked and rifles ready, but held their fire as Mason had instructed. He positioned himself at the trail's end, rifle resting casually across his knees as 30 armed men climbed toward him. "That's far enough, Cooper," he called when they were within earshot. The column halted. Cooper shaded his eyes, glaring up at Mason's position. "Reynolds, should have known you'd hide behind Apache skirts." The cavalry captain urged his horse forward. "I'm Captain James Hollister, 7th Cavalry. You're harboring hostiles wanted for attacking a legal prospecting operation." "With respect, Captain, you've been misled," Mason replied, keeping his rifle pointed skyward. "Frank Cooper is wanted for desertion, theft of army funds, and multiple murders. I can provide documentation." Cooper's face contorted with rage. "He's lying. Reynolds is a bounty hunter gone rogue, throwing in with Apache raiders." "I was 5th New York during the war, Captain. Scout and intelligence officer under General Meade. My commission and discharge are legitimate, unlike Cooper's. The captain hesitated, clearly uncertain. If what you say is true, why are you protecting these Apache? Because Cooper wants gold on sacred Apache land, and he's using army muscle to clear his path. These people are defending their territory, nothing more. Mason's voice hardened. And Cooper's holding a 10-year-old Apache boy hostage in his camp. This last revelation clearly shocked the captain, who turned to Cooper with narrowed eyes. Cooper drew his revolver, aiming at Mason. Enough talk. Kill this traitor and the Apache scum. Stand down, Cooper, the captain ordered sharply. We're here to investigate reported hostilities, not murder civilians. The standoff teetered on a knife's edge. Apache warriors watched silently from stone battlements, arrows nocked and ready. Troopers shifted nervously, eyes darting between their captain and Cooper's increasingly agitated men. Show him, Captain, Mason said evenly. Check Cooper's saddlebags. You'll find mining contracts and maps, not reports of Apache raids. The captain gestured to a lieutenant who approached Cooper cautiously. Cooper's face twisted with rage and desperation. With a roar, he fired at Mason, the bullet chipping stone inches from his head. Chaos erupted. Cooper's men opened fire on the Apache positions, while simultaneously turning on the surprised troopers. Captain Hollister fell from his saddle, clutching his chest. The lieutenant who had approached Cooper died instantly, shot at point-blank range. Mason dove for cover as bullets whined overhead. From all around the mesa's rim, Apache warriors returned fire, arrows and bullets raining down on the exposed column. Trapped on the narrow trail, Cooper's men and the remaining soldiers fell into confusion, some firing upward, others turning on each other as loyalties fractured. In the chaos, Mason lost sight of Lewanu and Kestal. They had slipped away at the first shot, leading a small party of warriors toward Diablo Canyon to rescue Shaitan, while Cooper and most of his men were occupied at Spirit Mountain. Cooper himself charged upward, firing repeatedly, bullets sparking off stone as he shouted for Reynolds's blood. Mason waited until the last possible moment, then rose to one knee. Winchester leveled. Their eyes met across 20 yards of blood-soaked stone. Cooper's wild with hatred, Mason's cold with determination. Both men fired simultaneously. Mason felt the burn as Cooper's bullet grazed his side. His own shot struck truer, catching Cooper high in the chest. The big man staggered but didn't fall, levering another round into his rifle as blood spread across his shirt front. "You're dead, Reynolds," he bellowed, raising the rifle for a final shot. An arrow sprouted from Cooper's throat, stopping the words and the breath that carried them. He toppled backward, body tumbling down the trail to land broken among his fallen men. Mason turned to see the young Apache, Nkosi, lowering his bow, face grim with satisfaction. The boy had chosen to stay behind rather than join the rescue party, his arrow saving Mason's life at the crucial moment. The battle ended as suddenly as it had begun. Nkosi and the remaining warriors disarmed the surviving troopers, while Mason approached Captain Hollister, who lay wounded but conscious against a boulder. "Cooper was using us," the captain managed through bloodied lips. Mason nodded, tearing strips from his shirt to bind the officer's wound. "Military escorts look legitimate. You gave him cover for a private gold operation on protected land." Hollister's face twisted with disgust. "My men died for a deserter's greed?" "Some things never change, Captain." Mason helped the man sit straighter. "Question is, what happens now?" The sun was sinking toward the western mesas when Lewanu's rescue party returned to Spirit Mountain. Mason spotted them first, 4 riders approaching at a steady trot. As they drew closer, he recognized Lewanu in the lead, and behind her, clinging to Kestal's back, a small figure whose straight posture matched his mother's. Mason descended the trail to meet them, relief washing through him like cool water after a desert crossing. The riders dismounted at the base of the mesa. and Chatan slid from behind Kesta with the easy grace of a born horseman. For a moment, the boy stood staring at Mason, taking his measure with eyes far older than his years. Then he stepped forward, chin lifted proudly. "You Mason," he said in careful English. "Man who fights Cooper, man who helps my mother." Mason nodded, kneeling to meet the boy at eye level. "And you're Chatan, boy who fought Cooper, boy who never gave up." A flash of fierce pride crossed the child's face. He extended his hand in the white man's greeting he had seen at trading posts. "Thank you for helping my mother find me." Mason took the small hand in his, feeling unexpected emotion tighten his throat. "Your mother would have found you with or without me. She's the bravest person I've ever met." Chatan nodded solemnly. "Like mountain lion, quiet until time to strike." He glanced at Liwanu, who watched their exchange with unreadable eyes. "She says you are teacher, before war made you hunter. Was a long time ago. Will you teach me to read white man's words?" The question came with the directness of youth. "To understand white man's ways?" Before Mason could respond, Liwanu stepped forward. "First, we make sure you are well." She touched her son's face gently, examining the bruises and scrapes that marked his ordeal. "Then we speak of tomorrow." When the sun set on Spirit Mountain, it cast long shadows across a changed landscape. Captain Hollister had survived his wounds, along with 11 of his troopers. Cooper and most of his men lay dead, their bodies prepared for transport to Deadwater for identification and proper burial. Around a small fire at the mesa's summit, Mason, Liwanu, and Chatan shared a simple meal with Captain Hollister, who had requested the meeting once surgeries were completed and order restored. "The Army owes you an apology," Hollister said formally, addressing Liwanu directly, a rare gesture of respect from military to Apache. "I've written full dispatches explaining Cooper's deception and the rightful defense of your people." Liwanu accepted his words with dignified silence, her hand resting protectively on Chatan's shoulder. "What of the sacred ground?" Mason asked. "Gold fever doesn't die easily." Hollister sighed, touching his bandaged chest. "I've marked the entire region as restricted territory, burial grounds protected under the new agreements. My report will recommend permanent exclusion from mining claims." It wasn't perfect, Mason knew. Papers and promises had been broken before. But with Cooper dead and his operation exposed as criminal, the immediate threat had passed. Time would tell if the peace held. After Hollister retired to his makeshift tent, Mason and Liwanu stood at the mesa's edge, watching stars appear in the vast desert sky. Chatan had fallen asleep nearby, exhaustion finally claiming the boy after his ordeal. "What will you do now?" Liwanu asked softly. Mason considered the question. His cabin was gone, his bounty hunting days increasingly distasteful after this latest bloodshed. The frontier was changing, becoming less wild, more settled with each passing year. "Been thinking of starting a trading post," he said finally. "Honest business between Apache and settlers. Might help prevent more Coopers?" Liwanu's hand found his in the darkness, a touch that bridged worlds. "My people need such a place, and a man they can trust to run it." Mason's fingers closed around hers. "Might need help, someone who knows both worlds." Her smile was barely visible in the starlight, but warming nonetheless. Perhaps such a person exists. Below them, the desert stretched eternal, indifferent to the small dramas of human lives, the blood spilled and bonds formed upon its ancient face. But in that moment, standing between earth and sky with Liwanu's hand in his, Mason Reynolds felt something he had not experienced since before the war. The quiet certainty of having found at last the right trail home. 1 year later, the trading post at Apache Crossing stood as a monument to possibility. Built where Diablo Canyon opened into the plains, Its sturdy log walls and wide porch offered shelter to travelers of all kinds. Apache and settler, soldier and civilian, all welcome under the same roof. Mason stood on the porch, watching the autumn sunset paint the canyon walls with fire. The stock corrals behind the main building held horses and mules for trade, while inside shelves displayed goods from both worlds: Apache crafts beside Sheffield steel, patterned blankets next to leather-bound books. The door opened and Chatan bounded out, clutching a slate covered with careful letters. "Look, Mason, I wrote all the words right." Mason examined the slate with appropriate seriousness. "Good work. Your letters are getting straighter. Soon you'll write better than me." Pride straightened the boy's shoulders. At 11, Chatan had grown taller and stronger during the past year, his natural intelligence flourishing under Mason's tutelage. 3 times weekly, he sat with 5 other Apache children in the small schoolroom Mason had built behind the trading post, learning to navigate the white man's world without losing their own. Liwanu emerged from the doorway, wiping her hands on a cloth. "Enough lessons, Chatan. Go help Nokosi with the horses." The boy nodded, handing Mason the slate before racing toward the corrals where young Nokosi, now Mason's assistant and apprentice trader, was brushing down a new string of ponies. Liwanu stepped beside Mason, her presence as familiar now as his own heartbeat. "Captain Hollister's patrol arrives tomorrow," she reminded him. Mason nodded. "Bringing those medicine supplies we requested, and mail from the east." They stood in companionable silence, watching Chatan and Nokosi work with the horses. Mason's arm slipped around Liwanu's waist, a gesture that had become natural over the months since they had made their union official in both Apache and white man's custom. "Any regrets?" he asked, not for the first time. Liwanu leaned against his shoulder. "None. This place—" She gestured toward the trading post and the mixed community that had grown around it. "This is what should have been long ago. A beginning, not an ending." Mason gazed across the land that had adopted him, just as he had adopted it. Dead water was growing, the railroad only months away from reaching it. Change was coming, as it always did. But here, at this crossroads between worlds, they had created something that might just endure. "Not an ending," he agreed, watching his stepson laugh with Nokosi as they raced the ponies around the corral. "Just the trail we make together."